So,
Hi, everyone. Well, we haven't officially begun, have
no. Thank you for joining us this evening. I think other people will probably trickle in, hopefully, as we do this talk. So we want to just take a moment and get settled here.
What was the title of what we're going to talk about?
The title is something like Conspiracies and Cults, or Seeing Through the Mind.
Oh, Seeing Through
is
the Mind.
what it was. Seeing Through the Mind.
That sounds...
So, Seeing Through the Mind, Conspiracies and Cults, and Discrimination or Discernment. And so, what we are wanting to do with this talk, we've had a lot of people over the last year in touch with us because, as many of you may well know, in the world, we've had an odd world going on because of the pandemic. And we've all been so isolated and so cut off. And some of us in parts of the world who are here with us tonight are still pretty much in lockdown. In the US, we're lucky in that we are, kind of coming out of it a little bit.
For now.
For now. And coming out of it, we are out of it. People are just flopping back into old patterns of behavior. And so this is a really important time for all of us to be careful and to not let old patterns of behavior rule in a way that kind of destroy the tenderness and the vulnerability and the learning that we've all had time for and still have time for. We always have time for, but in the last year it's been, it's been right in our faces that there's time to learn. And one of the things that has distressed Richard and me a little bit over the last year is the amount of, and we've talked about this in other studio talks, but the amount of lying and non-truth that has sort of filtered into the media, filtered into our lives in ways that has really been dangerous. And also how there are so many tendencies in the world these days to let fear and the sort of fear of the unknown and fear of the other and separation from one another. It's been a time where those things have been perpetuated through the media and through our own isolation. And one of the outcomes of that is really distressing is that there have been a lot more people separating themselves through their minds by holding on to ideas, often that are conspiratorial in nature, and becoming so locked in those ideas that the ability and the willingness to communicate is set aside or covered up or actually rejected.
Yeah, we don't want to communicate with those people or those persons. Better to just get rid of them or to, re-enslave them or do something to them. And that's very sad.
It's been very disturbing to us to see this happening in the yoga world in particular. So that's why we wanted to talk about this topic a little bit, because we're all yogis, most of us who are here, and it's an important topic to understand what cults are, what conspiracies are, and why yoga people have this propensity to fall into the idea of a cult or a conspiracy. So we thought we'd talk at first about what cults are.
Oh.
And just for a few minutes, because it's one of Richard's favorite topics, as you know, if you've studied with him before. And that's partly because...
Well, I'm a cultish kind of person, and but I've at least like to change cults every few years to see their interconnectedness. But it's a natural thing. It's just like family. So kula can also mean is related to the word cult, and it just means family, or just your local community, your local group, your friends, and that's completely natural. That's the way people naturally organize themselves. And then oftentimes, particularly when you feel under attack from someone, it strengthens that identity with your own group of people, and so people take advantage of that fact that in difficult times people are like, uh-oh, I have to be very careful. And so that natural tendency is, and what makes a cult in the broad sense, a cult in the negative sense, is basically someone becomes quite pleased with themselves, and they start to enjoy the power or the money or the fame that having people believe some particular, not necessarily true story will give them. And so that's cult in the negative sense, because once you're part of a cult in the negative sense, even if it's part of a good older religious tradition, any of these, even a great religion, can go bad quickly if someone in it decides, I kind of enjoy the fact that we're better. My religion is better than your religion. My mantras are better than your mantras. And of course, ultimately, as the more I surround myself with people like brainwashed, then I just want to increase my power.
And so cults really, when you step back and look at them, because it's typically what happens, as Richard said, is, we want to belong somewhere. That's a natural human tendency. It's not like we have a to-do list and we put on it, well, let me join a cult today. That you don't go out with that intention. And 9 times out of 10, people who are the leaders of cults don't start them with the goal of starting a cult. They might think, I've got this special idea and I'm very special, but it's not something that is something people intend to have happen. And the sort of perfect storm of events that happens often is that there is generally a charismatic narcissist person who is in sort of the center, or they may not be that charismatic, but they tend very often to be narcissistic. And so it is their ideas at first might be inspired by something like going to a good yoga class and having insight into impermanence or insight into interconnectedness. But then they start this idea and they become so absorbed by their ability to be the one person who can put this message out there. And so to know it, whether you are being, sort of tempted into a cult, one thing to really look for is the person who's in charge. Are they really ego absorbed? Are they allowing their followers or their Sangha to inquire or to question what they have said. So that's one of the reasons we love having questions and answers at the end of this, is we're trying not to fall into being a cult, is that it's really important to be able to have a dialogue and to take feedback and to give feedback. And
many times, in a tradition, someone will just be tempted, either due to people who come around and flatter them and say, "Oh, you are the greatest light, since you are it," and then. And oftentimes it's the people that surround you. Then you don't want people to inquire, because why should they? Because inquiring kind of implies that there's this deep ancient tradition of many, many different teachers, and therefore many, many different sub-branches and many different dialogues, and it's quite exciting. And in a cult, we don't want you to check that stuff out, because then you might leave, and you'll start actually to enjoy it. And so it's something that I think yoga people are somewhat vulnerable to, and this is true not just in modern yoga, but this is historically true throughout. With religious groups all around the world, that people who come into, a kind of mystical experience where they want to practice either through being inspired by drugs, or inspired by a crisis in their life, or being inspired by anything, they're already in a sense rejected by most people in the society as being odd or being special and so they're already, I think, vulnerable.
And the curious thing is that people want to be special, and so it's like,
No,
you get
know,
rejected.
course,
You get rejected by society, and then you find yourself in a cult where really what you're wanting is to be very, very special and to be the one.
Yeah. So you're going from the fringes of normal society to all of a sudden you're way ahead of them all, and so that specialness. And I think this, it's big in the mystical world and the yoga world all over.
And it's particularly distressing because people come to yoga and lay down their souls, lay down their identities often, because they're so enthusiastic about this teaching that they have just encountered. And then if the teacher abuses that, and it's a major abuse of power, it is really awful. And so to just be careful. And we totally, those of you who've worked with us over the years know how important we feel it is to try going to different teachers for different subjects, and for the same subject, and reading different texts, but then having a home group that you can then bounce your ideas around with is so vital. And if you find yourself in a position where you can't do that, then really pause and take a look closely at what's going on. Because these things like cults, and we've known a few of them that have evolved over the years in various different places, it's this sort of step-by-step thing where people suddenly, are living on a compound, and the followers who are the closest to the cult leader feel special. So there's this inner circle and then the outer circle, and this political dynamic that really was not part of the foundation starts to just sort of bubble up. And it seems to be human nature that happens. And when you get sort of twisted people in charge. So, what we really encourage for all of you is that you keep dialogue going, that you make certain that if you are studying with someone, that they encourage questioning, that they will answer questions.
Yeah, and this is actually in most traditions, that have survived at least a few hundred years, if not thousands and thousands of years. This is emphasized that you actually have maybe a primary teacher, so that you do have some sort of practice that you are good at, but then they encourage you to have all these other teachers, which are really helpful. So when you're not allowed that, beware.
Yeah.
And so what often happens is a group surrounding a charismatic, and I can think of some politicians like this, that this politician is actually surrounded by the people who really pull the strings, who are really conspiring. But I think one of their techniques is to create, to accuse other people of conspiring. Oh, those people are conspiring against us. And so to make up something that is very likely not true, or to kind of cherry pick historical facts or patterns and say, oh, this is what's being done. And so you're basically accusing, there's a hypocrisy to the kind of conspiracy that we're talking about, where you basically you accuse someone else of doing it. Oh, those people, what's the QAnon thing? Traffic children or something, or they eat children, and people. There are people who've done that, but it's you got to have some facts, and so you accuse someone of something horrible, and then people just naturally are repulsed, but because they don't have the habit of really how to investigate whether something actually has happened historically or is happening, they naturally those people. And so just like a con artist starts conning you by accusing you of exactly what they're doing. Okay. And so notice that pattern.
And so this is really where cults and conspiracies sort of have this common ground. And the idea of conspiracies is that people very often, again, have a feeling of vulnerability, a feeling of searching, a feeling more so than is necessarily what happens when people join cults, but with conspiracies, a lack of trust in either, a big picture in the whole history of humankind is, we need to just scrap it and start over, or a particular situation, a government or a school or a belief system or whatever. And so there's this inherent lack of trust that has somehow arisen, and a sense of vulnerability and a sense of searching. And these things merge together, and very often, that's the sort of fodder that fuels conspiracies of mind, conspiracies of thought. And so a big question that Richard and I have had over the last year, and you may or may not be aware of this, but it is, why is it that within the yoga world at large, And there have been articles. There was one article recently in the Los Angeles Times or whatever the paper is about this huge, conspiracy. The number of people in yoga in LA who are into the QAnon conspiracy, and that's fascinating. And it's also a very strange event. Why is it? Why is it now? And why is it yoga people? So we thought we'd maybe talk a little about yoga people, why people who gravitate to yoga might be more prone to this kind of thing, or...
Why would people gravitate to yoga? Oftentimes because yoga is presented as this is an esoteric topic. It is channeled through revelation, much like scripture. And so it's really not something that is rational. And so you could just switch off your rational mind, because it's so inconvenient and you can never really understand it. And so it's taught as a way of switching off the mind, rather than turning on the mind and refining it until it becomes what is called intelligent, or it develops this intelligence that's really sharp and can go, aha, and discriminate. They call it discriminating awareness, I think.
And so people go to yoga often who are challenging themselves in some way, or facing challenges in life. And so they're, as those who wind up sometimes in cults, people find themselves in yoga, and it's like a dog lying on their back where they're completely vulnerable to something that might, attack them. And then people who are sort of thinking outside the box sometimes come to yoga. So when you're thinking outside the box, then you hear an idea that is a conspiracy theory about, well, this thing doesn't make sense. Say the moon landing, I wasn't really there. How can I be certain that it happened? And you've already thought, well, thinking outside the box, keeping an open mind is important. Let me, explore that idea. And that's not bad, to explore the idea. Right. Was the moon landing really real or not?
Or may I say, is the earth flat?
Yeah.
And it sure looks flat from
up our, when we look out our window here.
Looks, yeah. Well, it's almost curved the other way. And
so it's really important to keep that questioning mind open, and to, when someone makes a conclusion that the earth is flat, or that there was no moon landing, or that the COVID virus was started because of a particular group of people wanting to control other people, those are good questions to ask.
And they're natural, because a lot of times, even what I would classify as, that's a really dumb question, part of my mind is already asking it, ooh, is that even real? Is that an hallucination? And I think historically, what has happened, and I'm thinking of, I don't know if I've used this before, Descartes, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. And then he got cut off, because I think, therefore I am, I think. He forgot. And he made an absolute out of it. And then it didn't jive. And what he did was he evolved to this thing where he became anti-academic, anti-science, anti-other intellectuals, anti-other things, because they would make people question. And so people weren't able to take a firm stance and, just punch through and do the horrible thing that the dictator wants you to do, because they were asking questions, inquiring, thinking, how do you know what you know? how do you know the Earth is? I think it's a great question. Is the Earth actually flat? And then I currently I don't think it is, because it's kind of fun to look, and to imagine the four-dimensional geometry and how different peoples decided it wasn't, and it's pretty, it's fascinating. But of course, I could be, I question that. But this whole movement towards anti-people who I like the word academic because of, I have a lot of friends in that world, but it's anti-academic, anti-science. What is scientists don't know anything. I mean, this is a revelation. And therefore, those things have to be shoved to the side, or they have to be, and you'll see in many countries where academics and scientists and people who inquire and ask questions are actually put in camps to be reprogrammed or tortured or killed. And there's so many examples of that historically, and which is interesting, which is why Descartes became, one of Hitler's favorite philosophers, because it allowed him to, all these people who are, actually know history and know how people think and who are interested. And we don't want that variety of thought. We don't want people to find out that other people are people. And so, whether they're left-wing or right-wing, we just want them to hate each other.
And so
then we can...
Yeah, and this boils down to, this erosion of trust of other, this erosion of the ability to see interconnectedness. Because often what happens when we go off on a tangent that is, some rigid idea where we stop looking at, well, maybe that's true, but let me look at it from this angle. Well, let me look at it from this angle. Well, let me ask this person and get their opinion, and let me read deeply, how do I know what I know? That when we stop doing this, that things start to close down. And so in yoga, we've all done this in our practices, which is so fascinating to look at, is you go to a yoga class, and many people in the very first yoga class or second have this sort of, aha experience, or a sort of mystical experience where they themselves disappear. Their ego, takes a break, thank God, for a moment. And the whole universe sort of joins together, and they hear, angels singing, and it's just like this amazing, amazing experience. And so when you've had an experience, even just an aha moment, not necessarily a full-blown seeing God in everything moment, there is this tendency then to realize, oh, I really need to question everything. And when you put that together with the circumstances that are in this day and age, where there is a complete erosion of truth within, not a complete erosion, an attempted erosion of truth. And people, I think their hackles are getting up. And people are starting to say, wait a minute, let's be truthful, let's connect and communicate well. But there is this, conspiracy to not tell the truth, which is really based a lot on people in political situations or business situations needing power and money. And this is their path to doing that. So we, as just, Joe Schmo yoga student, we go in, we have a mystical experience, and then we step outside the studio and we see that there is this erosion of respect for one another, an erosion of the respect for truth, and an erosion of a belief in interconnectedness. And so if that stimulates in us a feeling of fear or uncertainty or not able to, not being able to understand. Those are the qualities we were talking about at the beginning of this talk that draw people in to something like a cult, or draw people in to a conspiracy, into believing something that will answer their questions so that they can start to feel some relief that, oh, okay, here's the answer. I knew something was wrong. Now I have an answer. And because we have separated ourselves out from others because of our fear, then we stop communicating. And that's where the real problems arise. And that's so anti-yoga. And yet, because yoga is this fringe thing in some ways, it's also very much embedded in what yoga is. So it's this peculiar sort of combination of things. And it's also perpetuated by the social media that's happening, because social media really is this part of our world that we can't no longer say, oh, I don't do that. Whether you don't do it or not, enough people do. That social media is carving some courses in our culture. And one of the things that social media thrives on is sensational reporting. And when you take a simple idea, and often conspiracies begin with a seed of truth, or like in QAnon with this young guy in Amsterdam who decided, well, let's just make this fantasy world up. But whatever, it starts with a seed of something and then grows out from there. Social media is this sort of component that adds to it, that combines with lack of truth and lack of inquiry to sort of make it very difficult to know what to believe in these days.
Very difficult. And yet, we want to believe in something. And this is, so there's this word shraddha, that, which means trust. And in, your kind of aha moment, you go, and it doesn't have to, the label you put on it doesn't matter. It's just like, it's just a natural feeling of, whatever you say is the danger. Oh, it's a natural feeling of love. Well, what do you mean by love? No, it's a feeling of the self. What do you mean by self? No, it's a feeling of emptiness. What do you, no. So the words, the definition is not really the thing that you feel. And so the trust is the ability to enjoy this, whatever we want to call it, radiant, the clear light of reality or something, without having to know it or reduce it to a formula. But the mind is very fast, particularly in the age of selfies. As you go out to nature, and there's beautiful, forests and jungles and ocean, and it's just like breathtaking, literally. But immediately, you try to take a selfie doing it, and that's kind of sad. And so people learn their trust instead. The cult or the conspiracy wants you to trust in the dictator or the. I don't want to give too many actual examples. They want you to trust in some theory being expounded by someone who's literally out of touch with fact and history and reality. And that by that trust, that's not what we mean.
Yeah.
We mean the ability to be stunned by, in the Yoga Sutra they say if you do a yoga asana well, you're stunned by infinity. You go, and literally, it's beautiful.
And so staying in touch with feelings like that feeling of being stunned beyond words, where the breath stops, or being able to stay in touch with what you feel as something that is your moral ground. Like we're going to move into talking about, discernment here in a moment. And it is really important as we study yoga that we take not only the practices of becoming embodied, the practices of having theories like interconnectedness that we feel viscerally, but that we take the responsibility to decide, I have these particular ethical foundations in the way I behave in the world. And we talk about them in the Yoga Sutras. We are given a list of the yamas and niyamas, etc. But it's more important than just having a list to really grok on a visceral level what is representative of truth and meaning and beauty to you, and to have you don't have to have it like on a sticky note on your refrigerator, but to really have a sense of what your intention, what your dharma in this world is, what your purpose is. And then as you are acting in the world, and if you do get caught into some, and it's been fascinating to me to be around quite a number of people these last number of months who have had really interesting conspiracy ideas that when they've presented them to me, I've initially, done this, and then I've thought about them, and I've thought, well, I wonder. And to, and then start really investigating, and then look at those, like in terms of how do they mesh with my intention in the world? In other words, not the specifics of that particular conspiracy or cult, but if that conspiracy or that cult prevents people from communicating or prevents people from seeing the interconnected nature of everything that to me is true and is part of what gives me fuel to continue in the world. And if my behavior starts to create separateness and divisiveness and an unwillingness to hear the other, then what is that about? And why am I doing that? And I really think that that's a point in our, in our way of being where we say, I don't want to do that. We have the choice to, rather than make it a negative thing. And conspiracies, when you look at what they are ideas that have the intent behind them of doing damage to others.
Yeah.
And in this world, yes, there are a lot of people who have been vile, and there have been injustices, and there have been horrible things that have happened. And so there's this tendency to think, oh, well, it's all a big conspiracy. But the question is, what is the intent behind something?
Because technically you can conspire to save people from conspiracies. But you got to be careful, because I am the best because I see the problem here, and so it's like it's a funny thing that the idea of discriminating awareness is that everybody. So if I even state my intention at the beginning of a yoga class, and I can have. And this is why it's good to have a good sangha, a good community, because you say, may I be happy, may all beings be happy, and may this be of service to people. And maybe you don't mean it yet, but at least, that's good. And so what's happening is, in order to practice yoga, you're using the ego tendency of the mind to create a sacred space. So I'm going to focus on, this. Right now I'm looking into a laptop computer. But normally, I'd have a sacred table, maybe, geometrically perfect. And I'm going to tell myself that the entire universe is here in this table, which of course is true in the sense of physics. And so I'm able to then, through the mind, it pulls out and it makes one space more sacred than the other. That way I can focus on it. And it could be stuff that is naturally familiar to me, like songs and mantras and things that I already associate with. And we all culturally, or just from our own upbringing, not necessarily the cult we've joined, but from our own culture, in our own languages, there are things that we like, like... Okay, I always use kittens and puppies, but most people like them. Some people like to eat them, and so that's natural. And then the discriminating awareness is to say, aha. So to separate my identity with that, and to see that what I was thinking was a sacred space is actually totally interpenetrating in a tantra or a web with everything else. And then that allows me to see through how the mind was playing. The mind naturally gets confused because it confuses the name or the selfie of something, the name of it, with what it actually is. And so you have to be able to separate that with what they call the double-edged razor of the intelligence. And in doing that, you start to see your own mind as being just as conspiratorial as anyone else's mind. At least it has that potential. And that way then you're able then to let go and to go into a deeper and deeper experience. But that's very difficult. And people who are making a lot of money or a lot of enjoying the power or the narcissistic joy of getting more and more power or more and more wealth, they don't want you to do that. And so they don't want this intelligence that comes. And the intelligence isn't actually yours. Those are those functions of the lower kind of the mind that is the naturally religious, clinging, egotistic. But the intelligence allows you then to use that. And in doing that, you start to have an empathy, not that you have an empathy with the conspirators too. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, if I simply, the conspirators are what are really wrecking this world, that's a lot of people.
And so it starts to be this process of seeing beyond the specifics of something like a conspiracy. That's part of discriminating awareness. So that discriminating awareness is the ability to not get confused by the joining together of things that are not joined. The separation of things and the joining together of things that are not actually separate. In other words, the name and the form of something, so that you see the big picture. And we all need to be able to see the specifics and then see the specifics within context. And that's where discriminating awareness comes in. So when you read the Yoga Sutra and other texts too, but the Yoga Sutra is a great one that really describes when you have the kleshas, which are the roots of suffering, and the very first one is avidya, or this confusion.
It's the big problem
that we're talking about.
And it's simply this confusion, lack of intelligence that thinks there's self where there's no self, that thinks something is eternal when it's totally impermanent. And it also gets confused with things, oh, something is really happy when actually it's totally miserable.
And so the discernment, the discriminating awareness comes from the practices. So in the Yoga Sutra, we were looking at where it's mentioned, and it's in chapter 2 in verse 28, I think.
We start with verse 20.
But before that, there's some really, so check it out in the Yoga Sutra, but really looking at what is discernment? How do you discriminate? How do you have discrimination? And so in our culture, the word discriminating has gotten a bad rap because people don't want to discriminate against other people of color or other people of, lesser
religions.
Yeah, whatever. And so there's been a sort of movement in the yoga world in particular. Well, I'm not going to make judgments. I'm not going to discriminate. And that's a good thing, that you don't want to discriminate against other people. But making judgment is incredibly important. It's a function of the intelligence. When you project a judgment out onto others, that's when the problem arises.
And you literally become stupid in it.
Yeah.
Although your deep mind, which isn't actually your mind, is tracing all of this. It's the prana knows. The prana isn't actually you. It's kind of it's smarter than that. It knows.
And discriminating awareness comes from the ability to sort of ride in the process of samadhi that is part of the yoga practice. And so if you want to describe the different kinds of, and they're different like we think sometimes, the goal of yoga is samadhi. And that's not what it is. Samadhi is a tool or a process.
Yeah, it's the very beginning of the practice is the samadhi. And a lot of later hatha schools, they'll change the definition of the word samadhi to mean only when the central channel is open and you're experiencing this stunning, indescribable, unnameable. But historically, the Yoga Sutra is a much more useful tool because you have sampragata samadhi, or samadhi that's accompanied by whatever kind of religious process got you to concentrate your mind. And so you'll have this, vitarka is the crudest level, but vitarka just means to have dialectical thought. And probably all of us, even people who don't have dialectical, they're having it anyway. And that's like back and forth, to be or not to be, and a very important process. And just to watch that process. And you never try to get rid of that lower stage of samadhi. You just, by sticking with it, you go, you see through it. But if you try to get rid of it, then you're trying to advance. That's the ego trying to advance. And then vichara it's a deeper dialectic that is just the continuous, stunning questioning on the more subtle level. And then there's salinga, or with a marker, and these markers are generally, it's still linguistic. You mark something, but it's not spoken language. It's just marked with some deep, ancient, cosmic feeling that might go on for billions of lifetimes. And then alinga is still the unmarked, but all of these are considered the lower things that if you don't reject them, but you keep practicing this anupasya, or you just keep looking, and you look again, and you look again, and you look again at what's arising, then all of a sudden, and so you're using but the trouble with the listing things is you think, this samadhi is better than that samadhi, and I'm going for the top, man. It's like you read the Gita and you say, I'm just going to do bhakti. I just love everybody. Forget this, paradoxical jnana stuff or vivek.
And so what we're taught and what we experience as we practice is that the meditation practices, the allowing of those practices to spill off of our mats so that when we're in complex situations in the world, we can focus the mind and have discernment, that meaning we can see a dialectic process going on, and this would apply to a conspiracy rather than just saying this is the one topic and it has to go in this direction. You can see the dialectic because your mind has become agile, because you have within your own meditation practice taken this practice of focusing the mind and then watching this this wave pattern of the gunas acting on the gunas, which happens with everything, which happens within your mind states, which happens between people and within nature. And so it starts small with focusing the mind. Discriminating awareness starts small with those practices where we start to be able to take some charge of focusing our mind so that we can step back and let this unfolding process of the samadhis build. And so when you look closely at what samadhi means when we practice it, it's not something that happens going from 0 to 100, to the final deal right off the bat. It's something that might take, many, many, many years, if not lifetimes of practice. And so you think, well, why is it so hard sometimes? And one of the objects of meditation that one can have discernment about is to see the stuckness, to see the separateness that is caused when we are filled with emotions like fear or anger or uncertainty.
Or craving for the enjoyment of endless power and wealth and fame.
And it's not saying that those are necessarily bad. They only become bad when we can't see them or when we choose not to do practices that allow us to say, oh, this is what is happening within my mind state, within the process of what I am experiencing. And so the way through finding ourselves trapped in cults or finding ourselves going down rabbit holes of conspiratorial thinking is to really cultivate discernment. And that involves this process of dissolution of ego. And it takes time.
And it takes time, and it takes experimentation. And so we'll try out a theory and then keep trying. And so when someone doesn't want you to keep trying, just keep trying anyway. And it's somehow to eventually build communication and dialectic with even the conspirators, besides your own conspiracy things.
Yeah, and not even the conspirators, but really, truly, to really notice the tendency to kind of recoil from an idea within yourself. That is a place that you can focus on that can be discriminating, that can be a seed for discriminating awareness within you. And so you've noticed, that that really upsets me, or that really seems stupid to me. And I'm thinking of one in particular for me that, most of you know I work with a number of people, many, many, many people who are in the medical profession. And this year has been such a difficult year for those, in the medical world all over the globe. And when people have come to me and said, oh, well, COVID really doesn't kill people. It's people who have had pre-existing conditions who get killed by COVID, which has a seed of truth in it. But that doctors are upping the numbers of people who have died in their hospital so they can get more money for their hospital. That's this conspiracy that's going on. And I've had people tell me that, and it just breaks my heart. Number one, that something as really tender as this pandemic can cause this kind of separation of us and them, number two. And number two, not being willing to look closely. And so I've talked to some friends who are doctors and said, well, what do you make of this? That people say, oh, they're just upping the numbers. And, have gotten these amazing responses. And it's like, yeah, of course, people have more tendency to get sick because of pre-existing conditions. But a doctor takes an oath that they will do everything they can to save a person and to do what they can to heal, to be there for this person. And that when a person dies, they look at all of the different circumstances that arise within that death. And if someone has, the most predominant thing is a heart attack and they had COVID, then it would be put on their death certificate that they died of a heart attack. Or if it were the other way around, that they happened to have a weak heart, but they died of all of the symptoms that are known to be symptoms of COVID, then that would be put on the certificate. And perhaps there are people who in some hospital somewhere are doing something like that. And so when I had this visceral response to hearing this over and over, I had to really step back and say, whoa, let me look at myself. Why am I having this fear? Why am I having this response? And it really allowed me to see the either suffering of those who were saying such things, or my stubbornness and saying, no, a doctor would never do that, etc. It was really, really helpful for me to look at, take the other person's shoes.
Yeah. Many people are very alienated from the medical world because it's a very esoteric world. They don't see people. They're not frontline workers, and they just maybe don't know. And so...
and the medical world and pharmaceutical world are two different worlds.
Yeah, there's a relationship, but they're actually not...
I'm not...
That's another...
that's a whole nother one.
Thing. But all over the world, it's... In general, it's underreported rather than overreported.
And so for me, I'm giving that as an example, because whether it's that or whether it's, the QAnon theory, it's really important to look in to stand in the shoes of the other who's saying that to you, and let my guard down, let your guard down, and say, what is it that is causing this fear or anger or something to cause them to have this theory? And am I correct or am I incorrect? Let me check around. And then let's communicate. Let's really facilitate ways of communication. And let's find ways to rebuild trust. And the trust starts within each of us. If you don't really, truly trust yourself to go deeply and to set your own beliefs aside and say, wait a minute, then how are you going to trust someone else to do that? And that's where discriminating awareness has its roots. And so that leads to the, sort of ultimate samadhi in a way that allows you to see through things.
Oh, I'm supposed to talk about that.
No, I don't know.
Yeah. So, double-edged sword.
Yeah.
And so, just remember that the mind tends to instantly flip, and you'll get something confused, and then with the name you've given it, just like that, and you won't even see that. And so it's just like a, and of course, con artists are very good at that. They are accusing you of what they're doing, but we instantly get. So my image of what prana is, any story I make of it, I confuse that, and then I start to ignore what's actually arising in the present moment. And so, it's so amazing that if we just share how amazing it is, or how difficult it is, or how easy it is. So it's really this, somehow, this sharing, or this communication, across nationalistic lines, racial lines, caste lines.
Will you go politics even?
Politics? Yeah, even political.
Forcing him to do that. Yeah. And so it really...
We'll give it a try.
Yeah. We're encouraging you to look deeply and to realize that just doing these little practices we do, sitting cushion a few minutes a day, our asana practices, our chanting practices, that these are the ways we stay embodied, we stay grounded, and we tap out of our ego enough to really inquire. And that's how we can start healing some of these conspiracies or tendencies to just glom onto conspiracies. That's how we can do it, is by doing our practice, but then not doing it in a kind of rigid way, to do it in a really open-hearted way. Tenderness.
Yeah. To take your yoga off the mat.
Yeah.
Or to make the actual world the mat.
Yeah.
Or the...
Yeah. It used to be.
Yeah. The seat. That's the meaning of the word tantra. It's the weaving of the foundation that is shared. Yeah. Okay. So we should...
we hope this has gotten you either irritated or inspired or, gotten you to think a little bit. And we really encourage you to keep cultivating discernment. And we're going to stick around for questions and answers, but I will stop recording. So did you want to chant or just... And if you chant, it's going to sound like we're a cult.
I know. I was I was going to do the Vedic chant, Sahana Vavatu, which is cultish.
It's cultish.
They overdo it,
Yeah.
But it's orthodox.
Which can be cult, but it can also be sweet.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to say anything, any language, any word you use, otherwise it's just to put duct tape on your mouth won't work either.
So.
Okay, so I'll just... Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanao Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvi navaditam astu mavit vishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So good to see you all.